am going to record the reading. Anyone who missed it, I'll find a place to share it, pre-recorded version later. So I have a fairly brief introduction, and then I will pass it along to our various readers who will pass it along to one another, so that you'll see and hear from me now, and then I will back away for the remainder of the event. If after all the readings we have questions in the Q&A section or in the chat section that I can share with the readers, I hope they'll be able to stick around for a few minutes and maybe address those. But if no questions come up, I'll assume that everyone's thoroughly satisfied, enlightened, heartened, and prepared to to say goodbye in good faith until we meet again. So, Kenning Editions began as a newsletter in the fanzine tradition inspired by punk and the mimeograph revolution. The premise was to imagine experimental writing as a form of civic discourse. A test was to be put to the endearing analogies between aesthetic qualities and political commitments, especially where someone presents their expression as a form of resistance to the status quo, even as iconoclastic. We still sit for this test 22 years later. A lot of my favorite cultural and commercial institutions, like the Pilsen Community Bookstore here in Chicago, or Printed Matter in New York, also Club Wonder, who hosted the first online reading I ever attended, paused operations to facilitate reflection and protest in response to recent occasions of anything but occasional institutional racism and police brutality, and the disgusting ways that they intersect. Admirable acts of learning, civil disobedience, and dialogue have been going on and shall remain ongoing. And I applaud this, and I wish to participate. My day job is as a teacher, and one course I teach is called Protest Literature, which most years focuses on the civil rights and Black Power movements and authors like Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Carolyn Rogers, and Gwendolyn Brooks. In this class, we explore ways that holding and repurposing public space, actual gumshoe protest, is situated as or inspires the appropriation and retooling of a cultural tradition. For example, how are the country blues and Dostoevsky synthesized to tell the tale of Bigger Thomas's fear, flight, and fate in Richard Wright's Native Son? I also teach a course called Poetry and Politics, and in it I have taught the work of Kenning Editions authors like Tricia Lowe and Jean-Marie Glaise. So what I'm trying to say is that this test is something that exceeds the remit of Kenning Editions, but also dovetails with what the press has set out to do. Of course, the questions I raise in my teaching and my publishing presume that cultural work is somehow political and begs the question of it being relevant at all. I don't believe that art is especially good at or even should try to offer moral guidance, but I have so far proceeded as though it has a political part to play. And so the last week I thought, should I go on? I did tamp down my efforts to promote or advertise Kenning Editions books recently in response first to the global pandemic and then to the racist murder of George Floyd in my hometown of Minneapolis. But then I thought that the test should continue and that my work as a cultural producer had some merit still. In short, I am no longer ambivalent, but the mood and appetite for this reading is not necessarily what it was even 2 weeks ago. 2 years ago, Ana Arzoumanian visited Chicago to read from Juana I, with Gabriel Amor. They visited my protest literature course. And when I asked Ana about the book's depiction of intense carnal fixation on the corpse of the titular queen's husband, a depiction which culminates in a profound expression of refusal of the racist, colonial, and misogynist project for which her lineage stood, Ana connected the tale to the disappeared of the Argentinian dictatorship and said, unforgettably, that we did not even have the consolation of corpses. Now that's my paraphrase, but some version of that statement by Ana showed up in essentially all of my students' final papers. It was a very powerful moment. Craig Dworkin's work has often tested the commodification of cultural authenticity, especially through scrupulous citation and appropriation. Daniel Barzutsky reminds me that Elvira Hernández's book, The Chilean Flag, which Kenning Editions published last year, was written clandestinely and under grave danger in Chile. It circulated via photocopies, and she could have been arrested or killed if her authorship was revealed. Cecilia Vicuña describes the Chilean flag this way: each word becomes a healer, a prayer for a wounded, enslaved humanity forced to obey the rule of profit over life. Arthur Rimbaud's work is permeated by a gleeful, often parodic, but always complicated self-questioning relationship to insurrection against the rule of profit over life. And actually, the most politicized teaching I've ever done was probably in a course called Poetics of Agony, in which Steven Zultanski's book Agony featured prominently. One thing I think that book and the chapbook he published with Kenning Editions a few years ago do is they show the nested complexity of self-doubt, self-expression, and civic discourse, often in ways freed up to puncture our information bubbles through the use of humor. So I think one of the things I can do is to continue to propagate this work. To quote Audre Lorde in the book of her seminars and interviews we published this spring, rise to deal with the work. And so while there are many more important things that we are doing right now, I think it's also important to do things like this. If you are able to contribute to the present uprising, inspired by the murders of George Floyd by the Minneapolis Police Department, Breonna Taylor by the Louisville Police Department, and Tony McDade by the Tallahassee Police Department, et cetera, know that all proceeds from Kenning Editions subscriptions through the month of June will be donated to the Chicago Freedom School. And I turned to the Chicago Freedom School after understanding that the major bail funds in Chicago were essentially maxed out and funneling their donations at this point to the Chicago Freedom School, among others. So Ana and Gabriel will read first. Then they will pass it along to Craig. Craig will then segue into Alec's reading of Elvira's work, then to Brian, and finally, Steve will take over. So I send it now to Ana Arzoumanian.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Kenning Edition. I'm very excited and honored to be here in this meeting. So I begin with Juana I. Ella se lo tiene que decir. Yo. La tierra removida es visible desde el aire. Una interrupción en la superficie de la hierba, un cambio de color. Si solo rascara a mano, encontraría debajo de la tierra una zanja de norte a sur, de este a oeste. Escaleras en las paredes para bajar y calcular la edad según las puntas de las costillas, las clavículas y las sínfisis púbicas. Si midiera el fémur, sabría acerca de la estatura. Decir, ¿en qué idioma hablan las cosas? Decir del hueso ilíaco que sobresale de eso, que parece un hombre cerdo hocicando la tierra cenagosa. Decir cuando la mano se extiende hacia la voz, toco la voz y es mía. Cuando alguien me habla, Felipe, es como si hubiera luz, y yo toco la luz con la mano, tu garganta, tu pecho. Un volumen de rumores en el interior, como si hubiera luz. Es simple. Ella se los tiene que decir. Un depósito de brazos atados a la espalda, tierra lisa, color marrón, solo rascada a mano. Y la falange del dedo gordo del pie más rolliza. Un manantial subterráneo que, al quitar la tierra, se convierte en agua burbujeando lentamente.
She has to tell them, the unearthed patch is visible from the sky, a break in the surface of the grass, a change in color. If she would only dig with her hands, she would find the trench running underneath the earth, north to south, east to west, stairs along the walls to descend and calculate their age based on the tips of their ribs, clavicles, and pubic symphysis. If she measured the femur, she would know something about its height. Tell. What language do things speak? Tell of the iliac bone protruding from what appears to be a man. Pigs digging up the silted earth. Tell, when my hand reaches out towards the voice, I touch the voice, and it is mine. When someone talks to me, Felipe, it is as though there were light, and I touch the light with my hand. Your throat, your chest, a volume of murmurs within, as though there were light. It is simple. She has to tell them. A stockpile of arms tied behind their backs, smooth, brown-colored earth dug only by hand, and the phalanx of the big toe on the reddest foot, an underground spring that turns into slowly bubbling water when unearthed.
Hace frío y está oscuro. Ella se lo tiene que decir. Cuando me hablo es como si hubiera luz. Mezclo un vino caliente con azúcar y clavo de olor. Hablo de vos y de mí. Una a una me quito las enaguas. Hace frío. Bebo el vino caliente con azúcar y clavo de olor. Hace frío. Está oscuro. Me estiro para ver si mis pies llegan a los tuyos, si mi vello con tu vello ahí. Es simple, es justo, como si estuviéramos en la cama del lecho de justicia. Lo suyo de cada cual, lo mío, que me digas, es toda tuya. Felipe, ¿de quién son los cadáveres? Me cuesta tragar. Ahí dale, que dale, una musiquita de la infancia. Ahí tengo toallas, sábanas colgando, tengo lencería, tejidos manchados. Solo tragar, creer, tragar. Cuando entras en las nalgas o cuando salís de tu pelvis, entonces una segunda piel hecha de dedos auriculares. Dedos que murmuran secretamente al oído, ayudan a inspirar. Yo trago por el oído. Quiero tomarte de un sorbo.
It is cold and dark. She has to tell them. When I talk to myself, it is as though there were light. I mull warm wine with sugar and fragrant clove. I speak of you and of me. One by one, I remove my underskirts. It is cold. I drink warm wine mulled with sugar and fragrant clove. I stretch out to see if my feet will reach yours, if my pubic hair and your pubic hair, there. It is simple and just, as though we were in bed in the chamber of justice. To each his own, mine. Tell me, she is all yours. Felipe, to whom do the corpses belong? I find it hard to swallow. There, on and on, snippets of music from my childhood. There, I have towels, sheets hanging. I have lingerie, soiled fabrics. Only swallow, believe, swallow. When you enter my buttocks or when you rise out of your pelvis, at that moment, a second skin made of auditory fingers. Fingers that whisper secretly in my ear and help me inhale. I swallow through my ear. I want to drink you in one gulp.
Lo que todos llaman Dios, la república del dinero, el imperio. Lo que todos llaman Dios, la vuelta al mundo, 14.460 leguas y la tierra esférica que gira, gira, Por todas partes y en cualquier sitio los dominios de ultramar. 14.460 leguas de mundo amontonado, mandíbulas apretadas, seccionando la lengua con los dientes. Por todas partes y en cualquier sitio. Mi patria. La memoria alterada como recién dormida de tanto dar vueltas y vueltas. 14.460 leguas aprieto. El diente contra la lengua. Pero la lengua es más suave, más blanda, no se deja cortar. Pronuncio cada palabra con un aire fracturado entre los dientes. Con el diente roto, la lengua habla, dice, otro mundo es posible. Dice, en el juicio, en todo juicio a la derecha del Padre, dice, cuando separa las manos de los pies, cuando dirige la mirada lejos, aleja la nariz del suelo de los genitales, se dice Juana, después de confundirse con él, de que él se vacía en ella. Con el diente roto, el juicio a la derecha del Padre, digo, poseer. Con la memoria alterada, como si me hubiese dormido recién, rendir cuentas. Cada uno beberá su medida completa.
What everyone calls God, the republic of money, the empire, what everyone calls God, rounding the world, 14,460 leagues, and the spherical earth spinning, spinning everywhere and anywhere the overseas dominions, 14,460 leagues of piled up world, clenched jaws, cutting off the tongue with their teeth. Everywhere and anywhere. My homeland? My memory is jarred as though I'd just been sleeping from so much spinning round and round, 14,460 leagues. I clench my tooth against my tongue, but my tongue is softer, spongier, doesn't let itself be cut. I pronounce each word with fractured air between my teeth. My tongue speaks with a broken tooth. It says, another world is possible. It says during the trial on the Father's right in every trial. It says when it separates its hand from its feet, when it fixes its gaze afar, distances its nose from the floor, from its genitals. It says Juana to itself after confusing itself with him, that he should empty himself inside her with a broken tooth, the trial on the Father's right. I say to possess, with my memory jarred as if I had just been asleep, to be accountable. Each shall drink his full measure.
Otro mundo es posible, hoy. Si cierro los ojos ya no tengo miedo a caer, ganas de caer, de que me empujes. Cierro los ojos, no veo que estoy tan arriba, cierro los ojos y te veo por la espalda. Para no sentir vértigo, vos también cerrás los tuyos. Yo te guío por un agua subterránea, te dejo vaciar el mar en una botellita que llevo en la garganta. Las aves o las mariposas se posan en cierto sitio después de volar, un parador. La detención que hicieron los obispos para cantar un responso. El toque de las campanas. Hasta el fondo. Lo que estaba suspendido en un líquido. En el fondo, solo aquí. Tu medida. Poseer. Finalizado el proceso, se obliga al vencido a devolver lo que ha tomado. El vencido. ¿Quién? No les daré la razón, la pierdo. El vencido, luego de 1000 derrotas, debe devolver las armas. El vencido. ¿Quién? Las armas con que me mataron 30 millones de veces mientras fui india. Las armas que cargaron mis espaldas en el camino de 14.460 leguas, con las que me expulsaron más allá de los límites de España. Dar la razón a cada cosa. La tierra no es cuadrada y no me caí del mapa. El vencido. ¿Quién? Hagamos otra vez las cuentas. Mi reino es de este mundo. De este mundo donde Felipe no está desnudo. Está muerto. Tomo la navaja. Intento más abajo del vientre. Sigo bajando. Tengo cuidado de no cortarme hacia los lados, ahora hacia atrás. Empiezo todo otra vez. Absorbo la sangre para que no corra otra vez. Tardó 47 años en abrirme la garganta, de aire a aire, expirar. Cuando aspiro y exhalo el aire por la nariz, la boca habla. Así son las cosas. Empiezo todo otra vez.
Another world is possible. Today, if I close my eyes, I no longer fear falling, wanting to fall, to be pushed by you. Closing my eyes, I do not see how high I am. Closing my eyes, I see you through my back. You close your eyes too, so as not to feel vertigo. I guide you through an underground stream. I tell you about emptying the sea into a tiny bottle that I keep in my throat. Birds or butterflies alight in a predetermined spot after flight, a stopover. A pause ordered by the bishops to recite a prayer for the dead. Bells tolling. To the dregs, what was suspended in liquid. Only here, at the bottom, your measure. Possess. The process finalized, the loser is forced to return what he has taken. The loser. Who? I will not give them reason. I lose it. The loser, after 1,000 defeats, must return the weapons. The loser? Who? The weapons they used to kill me 30 million times while I was an Indian woman. The weapons I bore on my back on a journey of 14,460 leagues. The ones they used to expel me beyond the limits of Spain. Give each thing its meaning. The earth is not flat, and I did not fall off the map. The loser? Who? Let's take account once more. My kingdom is of this world where Felipe is not naked, he is dead. I hold the blade. I test it just below my belly. I go lower, careful not to cut myself, towards my sides, then back. I start everything over again. I absorb the blood to keep it from flowing again. It takes me 47 years to open my throat, air it out, breathe. When I inhale and exhale through my nose, my mouth speaks. This is how things are. I start everything over again. Thank you, and passing it on to Craig.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Patrick. I'm really honored to be in this company. I'm going to read just from the very end of the Pinewoods notebook. Inebriated pines run away forever. The whole forest sings. The tree musicians occasionally fall silent, but the voice of the wood is always equally loud. Needles aspen the evening's convection. The pent branches throb. Slack grasses fluster the bluster of the air's fluctuation. A seep marks the degree to which the sap, cortical body being dilated as far as its tone without a solution of continuity, will bear. And the supply of the sap still renewed, the purest part, the most apt and ready, recedes with all due tinctures. A liquid elixir of pine pitch mixed with pitch pine switches quickens. Nicks in this instance indicate the pitch, the degree from the level, the rise of the drink, the direct bend of the sink of the leadings of clay or soft soil. Corfs in this context are falsely inferred as the gaps between hills. A tuning fork, tines, the blur of the spectrum, an A, an F, an E, then a stillness. The three proceed to trace the ineffable feeling of a breath of wind waning. The pitch sets the tone of the pine, the particular inflection of its voice expressing some feeling or emotion. The sigh, depending signs sorrow or distress or grief. The trees make entreaty, appeal, or remonstrance. Initially, they signal some realization, discovery, or inspiration, and then pleasure, surprise, wonder, admiration, and in the end, a resignation. Conifers, persistent, vacillate without the vast impatience of deciduous plants. After a certain hesitation, needles in tempest, intemperate, palpitate. The light rakes, then levels. Wagers stake against the hazard of the cast. Spaced even as pales, the bowls ranged like fence poles. Horizontal, the set holds, then climbs. The scent of the ranks, resinous, settles. Bark in a few curls coffers the trunk, needles net in the damp, pitch echoes and resonates. The first shadow on the cliff's rock sets the red hawk's curfew. The dark confirms the conifer's density. Officious pica, perk, and swanker. I'm always surprised by the pitch of the pines. Even in daylight, their silhouettes are absolute against the set. The base of the bank breaks, unlacing the sky's horizon. Needles sprinkle the smolders glow, and the firs gather amber between their needle tips and start to articulate the lateness of the day. Branchlets temperate the light and some wind. Resins retard the consummating rate. The tree's feigned indifference to the season makes us forget that their needles are leaves and imagine they never fall, when in fact they're just exceedingly patient and perfectly paced, waiting at an annual rate, slow beyond notice, and relieved only when their own replacements are ready. The relation deceiving redefines to lie or practice deception, to evade a duty, to malinger. In effect, the trunk's rectitude suggests their sheer indifference to the sun, no inclination to correct for the declination of the light's ellipsis' drift, no inkling of a compensation for the radiation's wane. A chyme styles analemmatic the dial of the bottom's branches skirt. The densest busks of twigwork form a hurdle. Discarded needles coat eroded soil. Beach driftwood hurts the curve of the bay's rondelled azure. Everything, abraded, wears away. Winds lay the staggered mesas spoil. The juniper purges its branches of fruit. The storm rusks the thorns. The wind, in the end, gains a purchase and, surging, uproots. The pine, which is born in the mountains, where it is quickly overcome by winds, is often carried off into gardens, where it's easily hewn by the selfsame violence. The trees weep from their scales and at the bracts of their catkins. Broom, cumbers, cumulate, breaks. The comb from the seacoast lunates the verge. Solutes pass through the symplast of the vascular asylum. Larchen slopes parch from continuing drought. Stone arrests deficient adventitia. The persistent underground members resist. A harrier hides in its asylum blind. The stolen and escaped evade. The deturned reroutes the taken and the left. Fugitives maroon new communities. The lacking tufts the flanching canopy. Obligates reduplicate the duties of the holden. But the force lies always outside of the law that creates it, off limits, uncultivated, beyond its own repurposed pales, exceeding the purview of the legislated civil. The pitch, as a liquid, seeks its own level. The flow lasts as long as the vessels communicate. Several denotations are seduced to commute. A woodpecker wrecks its own rhythm, then resumes, remarking the bark with a pattern tattoo. From a distance, its partner harks to the arc of the patter, then answers. The skin of the tree receives the meter of the beak. The atmosphere thins and pertains to the curtaining, skirting the ancient coasts stand at a certain altitude. A single species, entirely pine, pervades. The rigid pitch of the alpine cliffs inhibits the soil from seeding. A perfumed breath lingers out of reach of the heat. Bursts of needles splay with an abstracted radius, the larch's fascicles finger in asterisk fans. Certain hues blur, blend, and tinge when the light plays and bends on the plights of a span in particular ways. The needle's course models the curve of the spine. The skin, porous, absorbs the last fragrance. To grasp what one doesn't dare touch courts desire. The supine rises erect to embrace and resists. The proximate, delaying, risks promising the anticipant kiss at purloins. The lasting remains, the endless accusative echoes in feigned perpetuity, a deferring decay denoting its purpose. Even the bit lip confesses, its silence licenses simple dismissals, the salience pouts and addresses. Resigning desire cultivates pining. The silent in fancy, dazed, drowsing, now dozes. The forest discloses the strone's summer's slumber. Amber, archival, sustains some moment of lost, frozen violence as a photograph. Faustian wagers nostalgia. To recognize the sign's desire for expression is to prize the regression from pitch to rhythm to resonance. A tree seeks its own unsustainable height, degradation. The leaves wait the season, the sap refines. The sigh is pure affect, respires the sign. The size of the pines determines the spacing arranged by the strands, stands, rank. A resolve equates with a perfect proportion and cancels its ratios. The plagial cadence still heralds suspension's refusal on a final, surrendered concess. Aspiration, unappeasing, unacquiescent, recedes. The fleeting breeze betrays the trees. The insatiable frustrates its statement's conclusion. When finds in the send sounds requisite, echo, proleptic, and then, for a moment, again, the pine's pitches, aligning, define. From Ludwig Wittgenstein, if I say, I saw a pine tree on the road, and you say you understand the word pine tree, do you mean you know all the rules of this word? And are they all in your head when you say this? All right, thank you all. Be strong. I'm going to pass it on to Alec Schumacher.
Thank you very much. And you pronounced my name perfectly, so thanks for that too. Thanks, Patrick, for organizing this event. Obviously, a bit disappointed we couldn't all get together in New York, but I'm happy to be here. I'm honored to be reading, to be preceded by Gabriel and Ana, who read so beautifully, and Craig Dworkin, whose poetry I've admired for years. So the book I'm going to read from today is a bilingual edition from Kenning Editions called The Chilean Flag, La Bandera de Chile by Elvira Hernández. I just wanted to say a few words about the book before I get started. La Bandera de Chile was written in 1981, but it wasn't published until 1991, until the Pinochet military dictatorship had ended. And the book narrates that experience of living in the dictatorship from the perspective of the Chilean flag. And so it evokes the sufferings of victims of political violence. The Chilean flag herself is a protagonist, divested of agency, a national emblem subjected to the whims of political exigency, a body tortured by those who profess their allegiance to her. In my translation, I've chosen to render the Chilean flag as both a female and a gender-neutral subject by using the pronouns she and it. Originally, I had read it, the pronouns in Spanish are obviously feminine, but that doesn't necessarily reflect gender, since all nouns and pronouns have, or all nouns have a gender in Spanish. So I started writing this this translation using feminine pronouns, but when I spoke with Elvira, she told me she dreamt that the flag had two faces. And so this final version reflects the dream of the poet that the flag has two sides, both a she and an it. Despite the uniquely Chilean context of the work, this poem contains an urgent message for readers today, as we see rising nationalist movements across the globe that mobilize patriotic discourse in order to silence dissenting voices. So I'm going to read a short selection in the original Spanish and then followed by my translation. The book itself is one long poem, so no matter where I start and end, I'm doing an injustice to the poem by cutting it up. So without further ado, nadie ha dicho una palabra sobre la bandera de Chile, en el porte, en la tela. En todo su desierto cuadrilongo no le han nombrado la bandera de Chile, ausente. La bandera de Chile no dice nada sobre sí misma. Se lee en su espejo de bolsillo redondo. Espejea retardada en el tiempo como un eco. Hay muchos vidrios rotos, trizados como las líneas de una mano abierta. Se lee en busca de piedras para sus ganas. Una ignorancia padre aurea la bandera de Chile. No importa ni madre que la parió. Se le rinden honores que centuplean los infalibles mecanismos. Incipiente la bandera de Chile ahí. 100, 200, 900. No tiene en otros el territorio de sus propios eriazos. No tiene en otros el fósil de su olla común. No tienen hasta decir solo de colores andrajos. No tienen, no son. La bandera de Chile se parte en banderitas para los niños y saludan. En otros tiempos representa la bandera de Chile un 15%, ahí donde brilla la estrella para el 10%. Representa de blancos un 20%, de muy pálidos. Representa la bandera de Chile en rojos, la bandera de Chile. Nunca el 100%, nunca el 100% del blanco azul compacto hoy. La bandera de Chile es un pabellón, dijo un soldado, y lo identifico y lo descubro y me descubro. Del regimiento de San Felipe, dijo, soñaba el pabellón mejor que su barraca. Dijo, 3 dormitorios, ducha de agua caliente, cocinilla con horno, aplaudieron como locos los sin techo, la bandera de Chile. Levanta una cortina de humo, la bandera de Chile, asfixia y da aire a más no poder. Es increíble la bandera. No verá nunca el subsuelo encendido de sus campos santos, los tesoros perdidos en los recodos del aire, los entierros marinos que son joya. Veremos la cordillera maravillosa sumiéndose en la penumbra. Ficticia, ríe, la bandera de Chile. Come moscas cuando tiene hambre, la bandera de Chile. En boca cerrada no entran balas. Se calla, allá arriba en su mástil. La bandera de Chile es exhibicionista por naturaleza. A la bandera de Chile la mandan a la punta de su mástil y por eso ondea y mueve su tela, y por eso se la respeta. A la bandera de Chile la tiran por la ventana, la ponen para lágrimas en televisión, clavada en la parte más alta de un Empire Chilean, en el mástil centro del Estadio Nacional. Pasa un orfeón, pasa un escaleón. 2, 3, 4, la bandera de Chile sale a la cancha. En una cancha de fútbol se levanta la bandera de Chile. La rodea un cordón policial como a un estadio olímpico. Todo es estrictamente deportivo. La bandera de Chile vuela por los aires, echada a su suerte. En metros cuadrados se mide la bandera de Chile, su olor en respingos de nariz, en ojos que no ven sus aristas de luz y sombra, en paciencia sus diarias, las construcciones de desnutrida confianza. La bandera de Chile está tendida entre 2 edificios. Se infla su tela como una barriga ulcerada, cae como teta vieja. Como una carpa de circo, con las piernas al aire, tiene una rajita al medio, una chuchita para el aire, un ojito para las cenizas del general O'Higgins, un ojo para la avenida General Bulnes. La bandera de Chile está a un costado, olvidada. La bandera de Chile es reversible para unos de aquí para allá, otros de allá para acá. La bandera de Chile la división perfecta. La bandera es extranjera en su propio país, no tiene carta ciudadana, no es mayoría, ya no se la reconoce. Los ayunos prolongados le ponen el pulgar de la muerte. Las iglesias le ponen la exclamación. Las legaciones serpentina y sonido de trompetas. La bandera de Chile, fuerza ser más que una bandera. And here's my translation to English. No one has said a word about the Chilean flag. In its bearing, in the fabric, throughout the entire oblong desert, it has not been named. The Chilean flag, absent. The Chilean flag says nothing about herself. She reads herself in her mirror, small and round, glinting delayed in time like an echo. There is much broken glass shattered like the lines of an open hand, red in search of stones for her desires. A great ignorance aurates the Chilean flag. It doesn't matter what mother birthed it. Honors are professed that centuplicate the infallible mechanisms, insipid the Chilean flag there. 100, 200, 900. She does not find in others the territory of her own barons. She does not find in others the fossil of her communal offering. They do not have spoken even under ragged colors. They do not have, they are not. The Chilean flag is parted in little flags for the children, and they salute. In other times, the Chilean flag displays 15%, where the star shines for the 10%, displays whites 20%, pale ones. The Chilean flag displays in reds the Chilean flag, never 100%, never the 100% of the whole white, blue, red today. The Chilean flag is a dwelling, said a soldier, and I identify it and unveil it and discover myself. From the regiment of San Felipe. He said he was dreaming, the dwelling better than his barracks. He said 3 rooms, hot, water, shower, kitchenette with stove. They applauded like lunatics, the dispossessed. The Chilean flag. Lifts a curtain of smoke, the Chilean flag asphyxiates and expires, not able to do more. The flag is incredible. She will never see the burning subsoil of her holy fields, the lost treasures in the crooks of the air, the marine burials that are a jewel. We will see the marvelous mountain range sinking in the penumbra. Fictitious, she laughs, the Chilean flag. She eats flies when she's hungry, the Chilean flag. In closed mouth, bullets do not enter. She shuts up high upon the flagstaff. The Chilean flag is exhibitionist by nature. They send the Chilean flag up to the top of the flagpole, and that's why she sways and moves her fabric, and that's why they respect it. They hang the Chilean flag out their windows, they put it on television to solicit tears, nailed to the highest part of a Chilean empire, on the center flagstaff of Estadio Nacional. A band passes, a squadron passes, 2, 3, 4. The Chilean flag steps out onto the field. In a football match, the Chilean flag is raised. A police cordon surrounds her like at an Olympic stadium. It's all strictly sports. The Chilean flag flies through the air, cast to her fate. In meters squared, the Chilean flag is measured, its odor with twitches of the nose, in eyes that do not see her edges of light and dark, in patience her diarrheas, the constructions of malnourished trust. The Chilean flag is hanging from 2 buildings. Her fabric swells up like an ulcerated belly. It falls like an old tit. Like a circus tent with her legs in the air, she has a slit in the middle, a little coochie for the air, a little hole for the ashes of General O'Higgins, an eye for the Avenida General Bulnes. The Chilean flag is on her side, forgotten. The Chilean flag is reversible, for some from here to there, us from there to here. The Chilean flag, the perfect division. The Chilean flag is a foreigner in her own country. She doesn't have ID, she isn't majority, she is no longer recognized. The prolonged fasting has put death's thumb upon her. The churches administer her last rites. The legations party horn and sound of the trumpets. The Chilean flag forces herself to be more than a flag. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass it on to, next up we have Brian Kim Stefans. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Excuse me. Thanks so much, Patrick, and everyone that helped to organize this. And it's great to be reading with some old friends and hearing some new work, even from Buenos Aires. I did want to introduce you to my cat, David Bowie, who's sleeping behind me. I always think we have to show our pets as kind of digital comfort animals. Anyway, so what I'm going to be reading from is a book of translations that Kenning's putting out of my translations of Rimbaud. The test here, the technical kind of test, was to translate the poems and actually reproduce the meters, at least the syllable counts, in English. So that, and then also as well as I could use the rhyme schemes. So I don't want to say too much about it, and I'm not going to say all that much about Rimbaud. He does seem to have poems for all occasions. So I'm going to read the ones that are probably, or at least one of them that exhibits this kind of a revolutionary attitude that Patrick was talking about earlier. But I do want to time myself because I'm not sure how long these things are going to take. So I thought I'd start with one of his more famous ones, which isn't necessarily revolutionary, but it gives you that kind of image of freedom that I think is so much associated with Rimbaud. This is called My Bohemian Life, Fantasy. And so I went, my fists stuffed in my torn pockets, my coat so shredded it was simply an idea. I tried beneath the sky, muse, your willing servant, and oh, what brilliant loves my cinema unreeled. I wore my only slacks, enhanced by a big hole. A tiny drunk Tom Thumb I sewed as I rambled my opalescent rhymes. My inn was Big Dipper. Beneath the curving sky, stars, my chorus, rustled. I listened to them, crouched by country roads, alert, those warm August nights, until dew mottled my face like fortifying wine. And then, amidst milieus of teeming blue shadows, I intoned my verses, strumming as if a lyre my withered shoelaces, ribs of my wounded shoes, 1 foot beneath my heart. I kind of think of that as like a Frank O'Hara poem if it took place in the rural France. So this next one's called The Blacksmith, at least in translation. I'm not reading the French, by the way, so you should be happy about that. And you just watch me struggle. This is a longer poem. It's probably his longest poem in verse. Well, it might even be his longest poem in general as a single unit. It takes place on August 10th, 1792, so it's a historical recreation of a moment during the French Revolution. The king is King Louis XVI. And as a side note, I actually finished this translation on Karl Marx's birthday, so I don't know, maybe someone out there is looking after me or looking after us. It's called The Blacksmith. Oh, and by the way, there are 2 voices in here. There's the narrator, but then there's also the blacksmith himself. I'm not going to do like the audiobook thing where I change my voice to do the blacksmith, but I will try to change my voice just slightly so that you know when the blacksmith is talking. Laughing like a bronze trumpet, chilling in his girth and broad brow, near a huge hammer on which he perched an elbow, very drunk, roaring from his great maw, controlling the fat man with only his hard stare. The blacksmith spoke with Louis XVI that day, when the people were out, hurtling about their ways, dragging their dirty coats across the gilt facades. And now the good king, like a flagpole wearing guts, was pale, white as the victim nearing the gallows, and, meek as a pup, he succumbed without a fuss to that devil from the forge with his puffed-out chest, who flooded him with phrases so strange, so ancient, that it grabbed him by the forelock as if, voila. Now you know, dear sir, how we used to sing tra-la-la as we led our oxen toward those furrows of theirs. The canon, that's canon, C-A-N-O-N, with a capital C. In the sun intoned his paternosters, fingering his rosary strung with beads of gold. The Lord, high on his steed, blowing his horn, would scold one peasant with a noose, the other with a whip. He lashed us, and though our cows' eyes glazed, we'd not weep, and we went on and on and on until night, until we had plowed the entire countryside. And by that time, we had left in the thick black dirt a red mound of our flesh. For that, we got a perk. Our shacks were set aflame under shelter of dark, our children, still sleeping, baked into a fine tart. Oh, I'm not complaining, just unloading my gush. This is just between us, contradict if you wish. But isn't it a joy to see in pregnant June, to see the wagons entering, impressive, huge, the bustling barns, to smell the odors as they waft from orchards when it's drizzling, hay bales in the loft, to see the wheat and more wheat, piled ears of corn, and think about the bread the year's harvest will form, and that so much stronger will trudge to the bright forge and sing joyously as the hammer bleeds its sparks, certain that one day we could make a pittance, for in the end, we are men and of God's largesse. But whatever, it's the same old tired story. Yet now I know. It's impossible to believe when I have my strong hands, my mind, wielding my tools, that a man can approach me, a knife in his folds, and say to me, boy, time now, you plow my furrows. Or that someone can come when war is afoot and rip my son away from under my ceiling. Now, if I were a man, say, and you were the king, you would say to me, that's great. But no, it's stupid. You think I like seeing your tall barns so splendid, your officers in gold, your thousand sycophants, your strutting peacock what the fucks, thoughtless as ants. They filled your beds with the odors of our daughters, condemned us to Bastilles with counterfeit letters, and we will say, that's fine, all you poor, bend your knee. And we will gild your Louvres with our fat pennies, and we will get drunk, indulge in our lowly fetes, and these gentlemen will laugh, sitting on our heads. No, all that garbage dates from our father's era. The people are no longer whores. 3 steps forward, and all of us have brought your Bastille to the ground. That beast sweated blood from the last of its old stones, and it was disgusting, the Bastille when erect, with its leprous walls narrating like an old novel, and still kept us enclosed within its dark hallways. Citizen, citizen, it's our shared histories that crumbled, croaking their last when we stormed the walls. We had something like love animating our souls. We had embraced our sons and held them to our breasts, and like raging stallions snorting steam through our snouts, we went on, fiery and proud, hearts wildly pounding. We marched in the sun, chins held high, to you down there in Paris. They came to meet us in our soiled coats. At last, we felt like men, drunk on terrible hopes. We were pale, my dear sir, lightheaded, needing sleep. And when we stood there before the shadowy keeps, waving our brass bugles and our branches of oak, gripping our pikes, strangely, nothing was left to loathe. We felt ourselves so strong. We wanted to be kind. And since that awareness, we've gone on like a mad wind, the count of workers surging on the boulevards, those haunted souls run off in swelling, tireless crowds of cursed phantoms knocking at the doors of the rich. And me, I run along to finger the snitches. So I run through Paris, hammer in arm, face black, wild in every street, muscling out cowardly scabs. Had you laughed in my face, I would simply kill you. There's one thing you can be sure of. It will cost you with your men in black who receive our petitions and then bat them around like in a game of badminton, and in sly, low voices whisper, oh, they're such fools, and enact fake laws, place the bills on weathered poles full of pretty pink edicts and sweet placebos, and amuse themselves by cutting yet more zeros, then pinching their nostrils as we walk right by them, our kind representatives who think we're just scum to assuage their fears of the thrusting bayonet. That's fine. Let's get rid of the vapid press conference. We've had enough of those lying vacant pinheads, these gods of the full stomach. These are the dishes you bourgeois serve us when we, high in our madness, are snapping in half gold scepters and croziers. This is the narrator again. He took him by the arm, threw open the velvet drapes, aimed his gaze down to the sweet swelling courtyards, where the masses seethed and seethed, about to erupt, with the sound of hurricanes slowly building up. howling like a flayed bitch, howling like an ocean, their iron pikes and thick batons clashing, the din from their drums, screaming from their markets and their shacks, a dross of tattered rags, blood speckled with red caps. The blacksmith, through the open window, showed all this to the pale, sweating king, now wobbly in his knees, sick at seeing that. And this is the blacksmith again. Sir, that is the living scum. It slobbers on the walls, it rises, it squirms. Since they are all famished, they're reduced to beggars. I'm a blacksmith. My wife, she's part of that swarm. Crazy. She thinks she'll find bread in the Tuileries, but we can't get within yards of their bakeries. I have 3 little ones. I am scum. I have heard of old women who weep under their dark bonnets because their son or daughter was taken. So what? We are the scum. One man was put in the prison, the other a low-rent convict, but no, each bloke is an honest citizen. Now, freed, they are dogs that one despises. So, they have that thing that gnaws at their simple hearts. It's awful. It is the cause why they, feeling shattered, hounded like the accursed, why they are here now, howling under your thin nose. Scum. There are girls down there, many quite infamous, because they, well, you noble of the court, you know how girls will tally their receipts, then come to you. You spat on their souls as if they were worth nothing. Down there, you see your bells out today. They are scum. Oh, all you wretches whose backs burn under the sun, fearing the ferocious, searing and ferocious, and go on, who in your labors feel your heads about to blow, take off your hats, oh my bourgeois. Look, these are men. We are the workers, sir. We are the workers. We intend great times when historians will want to know who these men were who forged at midnight in the noon, hunters of new effects, hunters of new causes. When, slowly victorious, he will tame all thoughts and mount everything as one mounts a prize horse. Excuse me. Oh, the splendid red glow of the forges. No more evil, no more. And though the unknown is frightening, yet we will know. Hammers in hands, we will file through all this new knowledge. And so, brothers, forward. On occasion, we will rest in that dream garden of a simple life lived with passion, with no word of evil, working under the solemn regard of a woman who we love with a noble love. And we will work proudly the long day through, no slave, but listening like to a trumpet to duty. And we will feel happy. Oh, there's really no way that anyone at all would make us bend down. We'll have a loaded gun above our hearths. Oh, the air is thick with the smells of battle. I'm sorry, what was I saying? I am from the swell, and there are some left to pluck, informers and sharks. But we are free. We do, yes, we do go slightly berserk because we feel great, so great. Just minutes ago, I spoke of peaceful duty, of a quiet home. Just look at the sky. We would barely make the squeeze. We would die of the heat and fall upon our knees. Just look at the sky. I'm returning to the crowd of the huge terrible mob, sir, that drags around your old cannon over the dirty cobblestones. Oh, when we are dead, we will mop them bright and clean. And if, against our complaints, against our vengeance, the claws of old bronze kings instigate throughout France their regiments in full regalia to take march, well, isn't that just what you do? Fuck the monarch. He put, this back to the narrator, he put the heavy hammer back on his shoulder. The crowd near that man swooned, drunk, dizzily bolder. And in that grand courtyard and small apartments, while Paris panted with its hurled admonishments, an immense sharp shudder ran through the populace. And with his broad hand impressively caked with ash, the blacksmith took the pot-bellied king and like that, harrowing, plopped on the king's head his scarlet cap. So that was that one. The scarlet cap was a symbol, that's what the revolutionaries were wearing. So he takes the crown off and gives him a revolutionary cap. I have a couple more minutes. That's a long poem. It's not all great, but you get the story. And this is another very famous one of his. It's another sonnet. It's quite short. vowels, A black, E white, I red, U green, O blue. Vowels, someday I will betray your burgeoning nascence. A hairy corset of black glittering flies, gambling around the void of a punishing stench, gulfs of shadows. E, white of steam clouds, bivouacked tents, the pikes of proud glaciers, white kings, or Queen Anne's lace. I, purples, blood from split lips, laughing with vengeance, or Saturdayed remorse, rouging a doll-like face. You, circuits, changing tides on divine green-flecked seas, peace of dull animals on fertile pastures, peace of a pensive curled brow engrossed by alchemy. Oh, final trumpet, strange with solar key changes, silences only spanned by worlds and by angels. Oh, the Omega, the violent beam from his eyes. Great, great. I'm congratulating myself. I would like to announce our next reader, Steve Zultanski.
Hello. It's nice to be here with this particular crew. I'm just going to read one poem, newish. It's called Bare Feet. In another dimension, this cough is worse, my throat's sore, there's a little blood in my phlegm. I don't call out sick, but I'm distracted at work, foggy, staring at the wall for odd intervals. My boss says something like, "You're not looking so good." There's a tickle deep in my nose. I think about my sore throat obsessively, analyzing it at an increasingly distant and intellectual remove. Time flies. I forget the funny thing that made me laugh yesterday, a really good joke that I'd like to retell. In some dimensions, like this one, the human form is an incidental function of the rib cage, a retro effect of the bony shield that protects the lungs from being crushed by a fall, from being flattened by a strong wind, from swelling to the size of a plump bird and bulging under the skin. I brushed the hair from your face as you slept. I wrapped a few curly strands around a finger and then gently slipped it out so the ringlet stayed intact. Your forehead was warm. And in another dimension, or on another day, that cough is not as painful but more persistent. My eyes are watery, it's harder to breathe through my nose, and I'm slightly poorer. I have most of the same possessions, but cheaper versions of basic household goods like cutting boards, ironing boards, emery boards. Taxes are higher in this dimension. I buy things on sale. My clothes are gently worn. I fantasize about tax evasion, but don't know where to start. I've never been schooled in the dark arts of finance, though I vaguely understand that it's simply a matter of knowing where the loopholes are and then jumping through them like portals. I leave my desk at work to spit pink mucus into the bathroom sink again. I consider calling a doctor, but even the thought of a chilly stethoscope pressed to my back feels like the sudden onset of premature old age, exhaustion, a weary old heart beating faintly. You look so peaceful, your mind empty of troubles. I blew an eyelash off your cheek and it landed on the pillow. It was far from dawn. I rubbed a few cracked strands of your hair between my fingers. In yet another dimension, or on yet another day, when I meet a friend after work, they say something like, "Have you been sleeping well? You look tired." The hospital bills pile up. I launder my money, hide it in foreign currencies, push it offshore. I pay my employees in cash. I have nice sheets, nice curtains, nice tablecloths. But my legs are weaker here. One day I wake up with swollen ankles. In this dimension, my house is just slightly messier. There's a thin layer of dust on the windowsills, piles of unopened mail on the kitchen counter, one or two more dirty dishes, mold in the shower. I watched you sleep, and though your eyes were closed, it felt like your gaze was resting on me. I caressed the wispy hair on the back of your neck, breathed in your ear, pulled the sheets up to your shoulders. In another dimension, as in this one, our generic human variety is nothing compared to that of the universe. And maybe that's why we feel coherent, because we're surrounded by more complex stuff than ourselves. The Milky Way of tiny objects that can't be seen with the naked eye, birds in high trees, and distant fossilized planets. There are thousands of microscopic 8-legged mites that live on our faces, laying eggs on the rims of our pores. These mites have no anuses, and they explode with waste at the end of their lives. I read about this in a popular science magazine. But in other dimensions, it's reversed. They do have anuses, and we don't. We explode at the end of our lives, and our waste degrades on the face of whatever creature we're living on, and there's nothing to remember us by. In some of those dimensions, as in others, we lay in bed at night and fend off unbidden thoughts, remembrances, flashbacks of past sexual encounters. There, we're married to nostalgia, and even our attempts at braving the unexpected betray a pained longing for a time when the future felt expansive, when our youth felt like it could be reabsorbed into the species. The window was open and a light breeze came in. I stroked your legs, but you didn't wake up. I ran my fingers through your hair, but you didn't stir. I kissed you very lightly on the top of the head. In another dimension, the human body is an incidental function of the mites that live on its face. The lifespan of one mite is very short, but there's nearly no such thing as one mite. They're continuous, multiple, perpetual. The people there are also perpetual. They live so long they forget most of what happens. They forget the funny thing that made them laugh yesterday. Like us, they cling to their happiness. They don't want it to vanish, though it inevitably does in a flash. Their sweetest moments disappear before they're calloused over by dreams. Sometimes there's blood in their phlegm too. That cough is still getting worse. I also want to remember my friends' jokes, but they fade so quickly. Often I can only relive their wit by aping it, unintentionally repeating a joke as if I came up with it myself, briefly improvising it back to life. Maybe in another dimension, one side of my heart is smaller than the other, and the pulse slackens. There's less time to remember things, but I remember them more clearly. In another, that side of the heart is even smaller, my pulse even slower. In another, smaller still, etc. Somewhere, life is so short that you experience only one thing, one quick sensation, maybe a rush of air in the mouth or a sharp pinch, but for that moment you remember it perfectly. I don't peel much dead skin off my own feet anymore, though I did when I was young. I used to love it. I remember the magic of that first peel. At first, there's this flat, dead white skin, but then it quickly becomes almost like a bubble. And when you peel the bubble away, you find this pig-like newborn skin underneath. It's so wonderful. Sadly, I don't have as much dead skin to peel off as I used to. But I recently re-experienced my relationship to peeling dead skin because my daughter likes to peel it off her foot, and she likes to show me. She takes off her socks and says, "Mom, look, look, look." She can twist her foot really athletically, like she can put it in her mouth and on her shoulder. So she'll sit on the floor and wrap both of her arms around her foot, and she'll pull it close to her face and say, "Look at this, what is this?" And I'll say, "It's dead skin." And then she'll ask, "Should I peel it off?" And it's very hard for me to answer because I want to be the one to peel off her dead skin, of course. And I want to tell her how good it feels to pick at dead skin. And I want to tell her anecdotes about peeling dead skin when I was young, but I'm ashamed. It's an intimate boundary, and I don't want to cross it. It's intense enough that I have to pick lice out of her hair all the time like a monkey mom. I don't want to invest myself further in her body's work or make her obsessive about her body, so I hold back. But she reminds me of my own pleasures, and I see myself in her because I can also tell that she loves to pick at her foot for a long time. I wish I could peel the dead skin off her feet for her, but I can't. But I hope that one day she'll ask me to help, or that she'll give me the skin when she's done. I want that, but I don't want that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Outstanding. I just feel so lucky to have heard from you all today or tonight, wherever you might be. No one has any questions, which says to me that you're all clear, concise, and simple in the best way in your poetics. So that's my assessment. Anyways, I'm clumsily trying to send you all off to do good things, to continue to do good things. And again, if no one has anything to ask or to demand, I say there's the whole rest of Saturday. Sound good, panelists, audience? Yes? Thank you all so much. Ciao for now.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.